Mesocorticolimbic dopaminergic network, functional and regulatory roles. I think I read it between undergrad and grad school. I think this was me preparing for grad school interviews. When you ask the question of like the paper that's changed your life, there's many, but this immediately popped into my head because I remember I couldn't get access to the paper. And so at the time, my dad worked in a hospital, and I was like, maybe they have access. It took me a while to find it. And I had no idea. And he was like, do you know how long this paper is? And it's like 50 pages. And so he had to go and like print it over the course of days. So it took a long time for me to actually get hold of it. And so that's why I think it was a time where I didn't have like an academic affiliation to pull the paper. Yeah, so I mean, it's a review, but it's a review that kind of focuses on the mesolimbic portion, not like the nigrostriatal, so less the movement, more the kind of, say, neuropsychiatric disorder type space. And then it goes through and outlines what is known and like the limitations. And just like one of the biggest challenges we have is being able to measure changes in dopamine and connecting it to behavior. And we've come a long way. And even in this paper, they mention when this paper was published, dialysis started to be used, voltammetry was up and coming, push-pull techniques. And they comment on like these are things are all happening that's really exciting because we can actually get our hands on what dopamine's doing. And I kind of feel that way about opioid peptides. I kind of like this statement here in the discussion where it says the mesolimbic mesocortical dopaminergic network might be said to be the Cinderella of the catecholamine family, at least in comparison with the nigrostriatal pathways, which have been more fully characterized at a functional level. And so like even at that time, it was just like, we don't know as much about this pathway as we do other pathways and other catecholamines like norepinephrine. And maybe we're still kind of that way. My undergrad degree was pharmacology. I knew I wanted to do neuropharmacology. I was still interested in how drugs interact with mechanisms in the body, but specifically the brain. And just I was fascinated by how little we know about disease states in the brain. So I was kind of open to anything in that space, really. So for me at the time, it was like very exciting. I was like, oh, that's the stuff I can do here. And this system is engaged in so many different diseases: addiction, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, pain. There's so much we don't know. I could be interested in all these different things. And like dopamine for me was this key player in all these things I was interested in, especially at the time. And so the way this paper was relevant for so many different spaces. So just this quest of like being able to measure opioid peptides in vivo reliably. I go back to papers from like Chris Evans and Nigel Maidman in the early 90s, around the same time, where they were like at the forefront of the field and they were using dialysis, they were using transgenic models to get a handle on what was happening during opioid use, for example. And they were measuring, trying to measure enkephalins, and they were the early people trying to do it. And they made a lot of progress, and then it kind of stopped. I would say the late 90s, early 2000s, nothing much happened. And then I come in during my postdoc, like, what are we talking, 2000, since the lab started in 2017 and before, I'm remembering those papers that I read during grad school, and I'm going back and being like, okay, what did they do? What enkephalins did they detect? What was already done? We don't need to like reinvent the wheel here. And I've lent on a lot of those early papers to influence how we go about trying to push the field forward and like get that momentum going again. We're at a time when there's just so many papers published so fast. In the 90s, it took don't quote me on it, but I'm going to guess less papers were published and it took longer to publish work. And so maybe it was easier to keep up with things, but now there's just so much coming out all the time. It is hard to keep up. I don't believe there's any scientist out there who's doesn't feel like they're not reading enough. And it's also like, this is a PhD as a doctor in philosophy. And I feel like perhaps that's lost on us in the modern day. You know, it's about reading, it's about thinking. I have like contents emails come through of like some journals that I'm interested in, and I'll scan the contents page, and it keeps me abreast of what's going on, but I can't read every single paper. And actually recently I've been thinking about how I feel like in the lab we don't spend enough time reading some of those foundational papers, and just the style of writing and understanding the priorities and the challenges. And also in this paper they address the challenges in writing that review, and I think it's good for like that context as we're now in a space where everything is happening so fast. But it's nice to just take a step back and be like, okay, I need the time and the space to think creatively and read.